especially prior to having kids, Julie and I have really enjoyed traveling. It's changed a lot since having kids. Now, when people say, what are you doing for the summer? We say we're staying in Colorado because, A, why would we leave? And B, it's just a lot easier to tote kids around the state than to go far away. But prior to having kids, we did some international traveling. And I think everybody kind of likes to travel. I think it's a funny question when people say, do you like to travel? Because it's sort of most of the time people say yes. In fact, if you don't like to travel, I'm interested in that. Come talk to me if you don't like to travel. Most people like to travel in some way. My father-in-law is maybe the only person I know who doesn't like to travel. Most people like to travel. When we were early on in our marriage, we had the opportunity to go to Israel together. And we got to see some amazing things. And the thing that everybody says when they go to Israel, they come back and they say, you've got to go. But in reality, it's extremely expensive, and it's a whole lot of time away from work. And so it's not a very realistic thing for a lot of people to do, because what you've got to do is pay your bills, right? If you can, yeah, you should go to Israel. That'd be super fun. But you don't have to go. But it's a really cool experience if you can. If you somehow get the opportunity, it's a really amazing experience. While we were there, among many, many other things, we had the opportunity to go to the Holocaust Museum. And there's a number of these around the world. There's one in Washington, D.C., there's one in Jerusalem, and there's a few others. And while we were there, we got a full-blown crash course education on the Holocaust. And we learned things that we didn't know. We remembered a lot of things that we had been told before. But an absolutely tragic event over the course of those years. 6 million Jews were killed. A really terrible experience for the world. I mean, there's not a whole lot of things we can point to and say, globally, everybody felt that pain and feels that pain when we talk about it again. A couple years prior to that, we had the opportunity to visit Poland, and during that trip, we went to Auschwitz. And although I would say that the Holocaust Museum was extremely sobering, I would say that the trip to Auschwitz was downright chilling. It was like, I have chills as I'm talking about it right now. It was like visiting a real live, horror movie scene. They preserved it really well, and it's an absolutely terrifying experience. And yet, really powerful and really moving. You feel a lot while you're there. A couple of years ago, we went to Rwanda, and we were in Kigali, where Julie has some family, and we had the opportunity to visit the Genocide Museum there. And again, learning about another genocide, another terrible situation in which, over the course of 100 days, nearly 1 million people were killed. A terrible stain on humanity overall. The thing about that experience is, rather than just being chilling or terrifying or sobering, that one was extremely eye-opening because it happened in 1994. You see, it's easier for me to categorize the Holocaust and some other terrible things in history by saying, yeah, that was when humanity hadn't evolved as much, or that was when we were more barbaric. 1994 was in our lifetime. It's not that long ago. We were interacting with people who had lived through that and were still alive and well and interacting with us. Megan talked a couple weeks ago about interacting with people who had lived through the genocide in Cambodia, where over the course of a few years, nearly 25% of their population was reduced to genocide. Chilling, terrifying, horrific. And if it's your first time here tonight, I'm sorry to begin all of this with this. I know that it is extremely heavy. But tonight we're going to talk about something that I think is lacking, if not missing entirely, in the way that we talk and the way that we worship and the way that we pray and the way that we interact with each other as Christians. I think there's this one thing that's missing in the way that we come together for a church experience or for a Bible study or for a small group or for a table group or even to go out and spend time with each other socially. There's this one thing that we have no category for. So what happens is we find out about these things and we don't really know what to do with them, right? So what we do, the first thing that we gain in a situation like this where we learn about something historically or we see something firsthand is we gain awareness about that thing. And we gain that awareness, we have knowledge of it. It's cognitive, it's cerebral, we know that thing happened. And then we have a reaction to that thing. And the reaction that we have is this ache. Some of you felt it while I was talking about some of the genocides that I just mentioned. You felt this ache. It's like in your gut. It's visceral. It's guttural. It's probably still with you and might last through the evening. It's kind of this thing that sticks around. But then there's this third element, and the third element is the thing that I think we lack the most, and it's the acknowledgement of those things. The willingness to either say out loud or say to yourself or write it down or talk to God and say, that thing is wrong. I have awareness of a thing, I feel an ache, and instead of running to medicate or running to distract or running to numb, I'm going to acknowledge that thing, and I'm going to sit in the reality of it. When we add awareness and ache and knowledge together, what we have is lament. And lament is the thing that I don't think I see in very many circles of Christianity most of the time. We live in a society that quickly moves to numbing and medicating anytime there's discomfort or pain or frustration or hardship, right? We live, subconsciously at least, if not totally consciously, we live in 2019. I shouldn't have to feel discomfort. I shouldn't have to feel pain. We're so technologically advanced. Our species is so advanced. We live in such a modern country. If I'm experiencing discomfort or pain, I should be able to do something about that, right? I shouldn't have to sit there and continue to live with it. And there's a variety of things and trouble that's gotten us into, not least of which would be the opioid epidemic, where we've run to medication or we've run to these things that help us feel differently rather than being willing to sit in pain and discomfort. And lament is the ability to sit in that, to have a venue for that. Usually we lack one of these three ingredients. Either we're not fully aware of the things cerebrally, or we don't actually feel the ache. Maybe we become so numb to the things that we hear over and over and over again that you don't feel the ache anymore. Or the thing that I think we lack the most in that equation is the acknowledgement of it. But there's this other thing that I think would help if we started to consider it, and it is a venue. Where is the venue for your lament? Where does it happen for you? If you were to step into lament in an average day or an average week or an average month, where and when would it be? See, I think if I asked you, how would you celebrate something great that happened, you'd probably have some ideas on how you would celebrate. Or how would you go through your day and kind of experience this, maybe a prayer of examine or a time where you kind of meditate on the things that have happened throughout the day. You'd probably have a time and a place. We even talked last week about how we practice confession here once a week, and we gave you some opportunities to maybe practice confession on a daily basis. People have more answers for confession than they do for lament, for sure. When and where do we practice this thing? I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. I hope that by the end of the night, we have a bit of a grasp on what lament is, but also where and how we can practice it. And again, I know that it's heavy, and I'm sorry for that, but I think that if we don't talk about it now, we may never talk about it. And if we don't talk about it in church, you probably are not going to have the conversation elsewhere, if we're honest, right? So this might be the best time and place for that. We're going to turn to a particular book of the Bible that I've never heard anybody talk about in a sermon. I've never really heard anyone mention in casual conversation. I had to do a ton of research on it because I don't know that I heard it mentioned even in some of my grad school classes where I thought we talked about the whole Bible, but either I missed this day or it just never was spoken about. There's this book in the Bible called Lamentations, believe it or not. It's 5 chapters long. Each chapter is a poem, and it's written by a survivor of the Babylonian siege in Jerusalem, which is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 24 and 25. If you're interested in reading a history of that siege and what took place there, 2 Kings chapter 24 and 25. That is the initial trauma, and the book of Lamentations is a response to the trauma that nation experienced, that the nation of Israel experienced. Each chapter or each poem, or 4 of the 5 at least, look like what's called an acrostic, but using the Hebrew alphabet. So the beginning of each stanza starts with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So if we were using the English alphabet, the first stanza would start with A, and the second with B, and C, and D, and so on. So each stanza begins with a new letter. The reason why that's important and the reason why the author chose that structure is to communicate totality, to communicate complete and total, utter lament, total desolation. They were experiencing full and complete suffering from A to Z. The 5th chapter, however, is different. The fifth chapter doesn't follow any structure whatsoever, and it communicates to the reader some sort of utter chaos, as if the pain and the sorrow and the suffering that the nation of Israel was experiencing had given way to chaos. It ends with this, a paradox. God is eternal king, and God is nowhere to be found. God is sovereign ruler over all things, and God seems to be helpless. God can do everything, and God seems to be choosing to do nothing. The last words are something like this: unless you've totally rejected us. As far as I know, there's no ellipsis in the Hebrew language, but if there was, it would probably end with ... It's just sort of this like ominous ending to the book. And that's kind of it. You see, when Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon came into Jerusalem to lay siege to that place, they had genocide in mind. They had the worst intentions for the people of Israel. They weren't going to go and slaughter everybody. That wasn't their way of doing it. They were more clever than that. They were going to get as much work out of these new slaves as they possibly could. They were going to bring the smartest and brightest and most resourced to the capital to work for Nebuchadnezzar, and they were going to scatter and disperse everybody else so that over the course of a generation or two, they would lose their identity. Really, really crafty genocide. And the people of Israel knew this at the outset, and that is why Lamentations exists. I'm going to read a couple excerpts, and the reason why I'm going to do this is to show you what the language of lament looks like. Because my guess is when you pray, when you talk to God, or even when you have conversation with each other, these are probably not the words that you're using. And yet, I know for a fact that the majority, if not every person in this room, has experienced some version of suffering. I know for a fact that the majority, if not every person in this room, knows of, at least secondarily, somebody else's suffering. And yet, this isn't the language we use. So I want to give you this language, and I hope that for you it is a gift tonight. You can write these down, you can take a picture of the screen, whatever you'd like to do, but I hope this becomes a language for our church. Lamentations 1:11-12 says this: all her people groan. As they search for bread, they barter their treasures for food. They keep themselves alive. Look, Lord, and consider, for I am despised. It is nothing for you. Is it nothing for you, all who pass by? Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me, that the Lord brought me in the day of his fierce anger? My eyes fail. Lamentations 2:11-12. My eyes fail from weeping. I'm in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground because my people are destroyed, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. They say to their mothers, where is the bread and wine? And they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city as their lives ebb away in their mother's arms. Lamentations 3:17-20. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. So I say, my splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped from the Lord. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Lamentations 4:4-5. Because of thirst, the infant's tongue sticks to the roof of its mouth. The children beg for bread, but no one gives it to them. Those who once ate delicacies are destitute in the streets. Those brought up in royal purple now lie in ashes and ash heaps. Lamentations 5:19-22. You, Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Why do you always forget us? Why do you forsake us for so long? Restore us to yourself, Lord, that we may return. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure. This is the language of lamentation. This is the language of awareness, ache, and acknowledgement. This is not the way that I typically pray. This is not the way that I typically respond to pain and suffering and brokenness. I'll tell you a little bit about how I respond. When I learn of something that went wrong or is going wrong, I rush to fix it, right? Do you ever have that immediate knee-jerk response? That thing's wrong. I'm going to fix it. It doesn't work in a marriage. It doesn't work for parenting. It doesn't work in global problems. It doesn't work with gun violence. It doesn't work with racism. It doesn't work in the church. It doesn't work in your neighborhood. Rushing to fix something doesn't get the job done. It doesn't mean that we don't rush to do something. But first, our first posture, our knee-jerk reaction to suffering and pain and sorrow should be to lament. to say that's wrong, that's broken. The world is not as it should be. This is why we lament. We acknowledge our awareness and our ache, and then we create a venue by which we can lament. Now, we are bombarded with lament on a regular basis. You see, I don't know that we actually have experienced more brokenness and suffering in the world over the past, decade or so, but I know that we have more knowledge of it than we used to because we have the news at our fingertips at a 24/7 news cycle, right? So the second something happens, you find out about it instantly, even if it's on the other side of the world. You're going to find out about more of it. So to us, even if there has not been an increase, let's just pretend everything has sort of stayed the same over the past decade. Our knowledge of all of these things has increased dramatically. So to us, it feels like we experience it all the time. The problem is, with a lot of these things, they feel like there's nothing we can do about them. If they're past events, like if you learn about something that maybe your ancestors participated in, or you learn about something like a genocide that we were talking about before, it can't be undone. You simply can't get in a time machine and go back in time and change that thing. And that is really difficult to swallow. And so we feel helpless. With present things like gun violence or bigotry, these things that we hear about, some of these things that we see with our own eyes, there's nothing that can be done because it feels too big. It's too institutional. It's too systemic. It's too deeply ingrained in our society. And so it feels like there's nothing that can be done, and we feel helpless. What about lament about the future as we see some environmental deterioration, or we see systemic and institutional injustice? We see these patterns in our society that are going to keep chipping it away at our progress as a society and as a species. We start to think this is too big to tackle. There's nothing I could do about that thing. It's like a freight train that's moving, and it's got so much momentum. How am I going to stop it? How am I going to change it? And we feel helpless. And I think it's so funny that even though we typically feel helpless in the face of suffering, we rush to do something anyways. Ill-equipped, not ready, feeling like we're spinning and spiraling out of control, we rush to do something rather than pausing, sitting in lament, and choosing to say the world is not as it should be. There's a couple sections in the book of Lamentations, and there's plenty throughout the entire Bible as a whole, where the author will say something very simple, will pen some very simple words. And they're words that we have built into our prayers that we pray on a regular basis, and you'll see them pop up in our services on occasion. Very simply, the author in Scripture, in the face of some suffering, will say, Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Because as we saw at the end of the book, he has complete dominion. He reigns over all things. He is totally and completely sovereign. And here we are feeling helpless in the face of suffering. Instead of rushing to fix, what if we stopped and said, Lord, have mercy? This has become a bit of a language of lament between me and some friends and coworkers. When we hear about something terrible, one of us will typically say, Lord, have mercy. And the other one in the room will oftentimes say, Christ, have mercy. It's just sort of like a responsive prayer, back and forth thing that's been around in different prayer books for a really long time. It's a really appropriate way to respond to suffering. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Another one that we've used regularly is saying, Lord, come quickly. And the response to that can be, Christ, come quickly. Because we believe that when Christ comes again, he will make all things new. He will renew the things that we are experiencing today and that we'll experience tomorrow and the next day that are hard for us to sort out and to swallow. There are two things I want to invite you to consider. The first is this. When you experience suffering, whether it's secondhand knowledge of a thing that has happened, past, present, or future, or something that you've experienced yourself personally, develop for yourself some sort of language of lament. Steal something from Lamentations. Steal something from our prayer of lament, which is available on our website, and we'll actually pray through it in just a minute. Just a couple of simple lines. Or maybe very simply say to yourself in that moment, pause and say, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Maybe find a friend, somebody you trust, somebody you can interact with, and pray that prayer. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy with them. We should do something, absolutely, when we experience suffering and brokenness. But what if we started with a posture of lament? So the first is develop a prayer for lament, or a language for lament. The second is this: develop a rhythm of lament. And this is the thing that I think could revolutionize our church if we were willing to step into it. Every night, I've alluded to it earlier, with Brandy, every night we sit with our kids at the table and we ask them about their highs and lows. What was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? And they get them mixed up all the time, and a lot of times they'll just say all the best parts of their day. It's really funny. And sometimes it's big things that happen. Sometimes it's really little things that happen. Sometimes they'll just take each other's ideas because they can't think of anything. It's a blast. We have a really good time with it. But we've been working on allowing them to say the thing that they'd like to highlight from the day and celebrating that with them. And then when they say, this was the hardest part of my day, instead of rushing to smooth that over or to say, well, that's okay because, that kid didn't mean to do that to you, or, I'm sorry I raised my voice, but you know how it is around here, that sort of thing. Just sit in that with them and say, that was hard, wasn't it? That was difficult, wasn't it? And in doing so, somehow, sort of accidentally, we've created this rhythm of lament for our family, where every single night we stop and we have a venue. And half the times the kids go, I don't have a low for the day. It's fine. There's a venue for it anyways. Doesn't matter if they have that spot reserved, or it doesn't matter if they actually put anything in that reserved spot. The spot is reserved. What if you and I developed a rhythm of lament where on a daily basis we had a space to sit and say, the world is not as it should be. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. I was talking to a friend recently whose wife has a chronic illness, and the children that they are raising also have a chronic illness, and he lives in a world of suffering on a regular basis. That is their home. Their home is a world of suffering. And I asked him the question the other day. I said, what if you had a time every single day of the week to pause and to lament? Nothing you can necessarily do to change the situation. Obviously, you've tried everything. They've tried everything. What if you just stopped and recognized your futility and recognized your smallness in the face of this massive disease, and you just said, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. He said, that would feel really good. I might try that. And I immediately thought to myself, that's what we need. That's the thing that we're missing, is this venue. Not necessarily to rush to fix, but to pause and to say, the world is not as it should be. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lament befriends brokenness. It does not rush to repair it. Lament chooses to recognize brokenness, sit with the ache, and acknowledge it, finds a venue in which to talk about it. It does not rush to repair it. That is the hardest thing in the world for us to get our minds around. That is what I hope for us, that in this series of prayer, we would be thinking about what it means for us to develop a rhythm, a posture, and a language of lament. I want to take just a minute now to pray through our prayer of lament and confession. I'm going to invite Hosanna up here to start playing. This prayer was designed very simply to be used and portable beyond this experience. We do it every single week, but what if you did it tomorrow and the next day and the next day? This could be the prayer that you pray through in your season of lament, or in your time of lament for the venue. I forgot to print it, so Jordan, I'm just going to have you throw it up on the screen, and I'm just going to lead us through it on the screen like this. This is how it goes. God of grace, you have always called your people to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. We join our voices together today in lament, confession, and celebration for all that has been done and all that remains undone. The effects of sin and brokenness are deep and wide. Racism, sexism, abuse, economic disparity, slavery, and depression of every kind. Let us pause for a second to reflect on this question. How have you recently observed the world or yourself to be incomplete, lacking, or broken? May your grace and love heal with greater depth and width than any evil thing created or allowed by us. Lord, have mercy. Most merciful God, we confess that we have sinned against you, our neighbors, friends, family, and strangers by what we have done and by what we have left undone. Let us take a moment to reflect on this question. In what ways, internal or external, have you wronged another person, God, your environment, or yourself? May your grace and love fill us and make us whole in spite of our propensity toward disobedience. Lord, have mercy. Jesus, your yoke is easy and your burden is light. We are weary and we are broken. Will you stand in our place? Will you hold us up? Reconcile us with God, with our neighbor, and with ourselves, we pray. We celebrate your grace and mercy toward us, O God.